For this forum this year, I wanted us to look, everybody's been talking about sustainability in a lot of the sessions, as we should, given the tipping line that we're all facing. But in ESG, G, governance, in my view, is the most important part. Because if the board doesn't agree, if the board doesn't take the lead, it ain't gonna happen. Because they provide direction and oversight of management to make sure that we are in the forefront. So today we have amazing women in all the program. So anyway, thank you. So here's another amazing group. I'm going to start with Boots. Well, that's not her name. It's our name for her. Her real name, Maria Aurora Giotina Garcia, from the Philippines. She's the president of the Philippine Women's Network. It's a group of women's organizations that she has convened, mostly on the area of economic equity. She's also the president and chair of the Philippine Institute of Corporate Directors. She is on, let's see, the board of, okay, where is it? It's here somewhere, Boots. Okay, you will mention all your boards. What happened to this listing? Anyway, including Enixor, Cebu Landmasters, Inc., and Professional Services, Inc. Okay? Boots Garcia. Okay. Next to me, on my left, she calls herself Maite, Maria Teresa Aranzabal, from Spain. And she is a board director of Credit Corp Limited, Banco de Crédito del Perú, Hijos de Rivera Corporation, and of course she's from Spain. She leads the Alir Consulting and Trade Group, her own company, which specializes in retail as well as real estates. She began her career at McKinsey in Spain and Argentina, and then joined a family-owned retailer. So that's Maite, okay? You see this? Philippines, Spain, okay? I work hard to make sure that we got the world on every panel. Australia, okay? Alisa Knox, on my immediate right. She's a board director of Ascentio, Tyro Payments, Health Metrics, and Healthway Medical Group. But she lives in Singapore, but originally from Australia. She headed up, or you still head up the Asia Pacific for Cloudflare? No. Oh, in the past. And she was CEO of Unlocked, Managing Director of Online Sales and Operations for Google for Asia Pacific. In other words, tremendous executive experience. She was named one of the 2020 Asia Pacific IT Woman of the Year. Alisa. Now, you've heard a lot from Brana, okay?
Let's stop there. Can I choose where I come from?
I know where you come from. Brana actually is part of the Dubai Advisory Council for the summit. And she is a partner of Deloitte Middle East, and which became a knowledge partner to our report that we released this year. Rana is well-known here now, and also well-known in other ways. Before Deloitte, she was HR director in EMEA, Europe, Middle East, India, and Africa. And for Deloitte, she leads the people and purpose strategy across 16 countries. And of course, she has served on the board of Deloitte. So, looking at governance, I sort of wanted to go through the voyage of each country that's represented here in terms of corporate boards, because the composition, the board composition, because governance is effective only in terms of those who are sitting in it. So I sort of want to look at that first. So Boots, you're in the Institute of Corporate Directors. The percentage in the Philippines isn't great. Tell us some of the efforts there, if you will, to improve corporate governance.
Thank you for that. But perhaps I should begin by giving a little bit of information about where our regulators stand as far as board diversity is concerned. There is, in fact, a revised corporation code which says that corporates, or rather corporations, should have a board diversity policy, and even emphasizes that board directorship should consider not only age, gender, ethnicity, skills, etc., and even adds the fact that that there should be females in the board and female independent directors. So that policy does exist in the
How old
revised
is that?
corporation. Oh, that's probably at least 5 years or more, okay? Now, having said that, the current regime is really on a comply or explain, okay? It's not yet mandatory, although there is a plan to make certain corporate governance policies mandatory by 2024. Okay, let's talk about board diversity. I'm happy to note that in the boards that I sit, we do have a significant number of women members. Let me begin by the two Ayala Corporation boards that I sit in. Ayala is one of the larger conglomerates in the Philippines, and I sit in the energy company, and we have, until recently, 5 out of 11 female board members, of which 4 are independent directors, which 4 lead board committees, including audit, which I chair, corporate governance, and risk oversight. So there, the contribution, the competence of the female independent directors are being recognized. I also sit in another Ayala Corporation in oil exploration, and the number is probably not as high, but we have 3 out of 9, so 33%. And in 2 other corporations, one in healthcare and another one in property, we also have 4 out of 9. So I'd like to believe that some of, or many in fact, many of the Philippine corporations have started to adopt a more diverse board policy, not only in gender, but in other skills as well. Speaking of the Institute of Corporate Directors, which are currently, I'm the vice chair and the president, we walk the talk, okay? In our board, we have 5 out of 11 female trustees. We do have a diversity in age, the youngest being 45 and the oldest being 75, so a median of about 63. And we also have a diversity in skills, as we come from different backgrounds and industry experiences. So ICD, as an Institute of Corporate Directors, walks the talk, and as well promotes diversity in our boards.
Okay.
Okay.
So why is the percentage still so low
I
of the
think-
listed companies?
Yeah, I think it probably has to do with the fact that it brings me to your question about quotas. It's maybe because it's only encouraged but not yet made mandatory. Mm-hmm. The other issue that has been raised to us as we were doing a study on women in boards was supposed lack of supply, which I also challenge, okay? Perhaps the more telling issue is really the visibility of the women who can become board members for different reasons. And so in the Institute of Corporate Directors, we deliberately also target to have more female members so that we can build a supply or pipeline of women who can be tapped to become board directors by companies that ask referrals or recommendations from us. So those are, I would think, 2 of the more more challenging issues that we face. However, of late, in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years, the demand for female board members has increased. Perhaps because of pressure, could be from funders, from institutional investors, even from small investors, even from talent, for talent, because some employees now ask about diversity policies of companies that they want to join as part of their consideration.
Well, let's hope it speeds up. Now, Spain, where's Margarita? She's going to kill me. Spain had a soft quota. Okay, she hates the word quota. A soft target, if you will, of 30%. It's gotten there, getting better. What do you think is necessary to speed it up even faster and meet, say, France's goal of 40%, and they're now at 46% of all listed companies?
Okay, in my case, I want to explain it. I prefer not to go to quotas in case you can establish a recommendation and measures that help to achieve the targets. So the ideal would be to say you need to achieve these goals in a certain period of time.
Actually, you have it in Spain.
I give you the incentives and I help to the woman to have the visibility. If it doesn't work, then you need a quota. But even having a quota, I wouldn't go to sanctions. I think it's much better to give special benefits to these companies. And also something extremely important. If you have at least 1 or 2 women in a board, you can be a member of the nomination and compensation committee. And from each committee, you can do many things. Not only regarding the board members, that you can be changing the gender, but also from the top executives' point of view.
Actually, your corporate governance code does have language that specifically identifies gender diversity, specifically women on corporate boards. Tell us about the companies that you serve on. Where are the women?
Okay, I have a very good example. I was in a listed company, fashion industry. The less representative gender was men. We were 4 women, right, from a total of 7. And even the C-suite, it was a majority of women. But again, it depends very much on the industry. It's much easier if you are in fashion. If you are in mining, for example, Peru is much more difficult. Then, if I give you the example of Peru, when I got in a very good corporation, financial institution, is the biggest company in Peru. Before I got there, the board was composed of 8 members. There was only 1 woman. So it was 12.5%. When I entered, we got into 22%, and in 3 years, we are already 3 women out of 9. So we are in the 33%.
And what do you think led to that?
We started applying, rather than ESG, we started to apply GSE. So the most important issue was to work on the G, and G was looking for independent board members and working also in the gender.
It's a very good point. Because corporate governance is still a journey, especially in developing economies. So, turning to Australia. Australia has been incredibly proactive, but it's been driven by the stock exchange as well as, your women's organization, whose name I'm forgetting right now.
There's Chief Executive Women is one of them.
Chief Executive Women. And so the percentages in Australia are very good. What do you think drove that success?
So just to be clear, when you hear my accent, I identify as Australian, but I did move there after growing up in the US. So I have both passports. So Australia had only about, I think, 13% women on boards in 2008. And there was a lot of discussion of a quota. And I think actually, to be honest, better than a quota is the threat of a quota, because people get motivated because they don't want to be regulated, and then they take action. The interesting thing about Australia, I was checking this afternoon, is we went pretty quickly from 13% to about 30%. I think we're at 34 in 2015. And the last 8 years, we're just sort of plateauing. We're in the mid-30s. So if you look, the percentage of new directors is a little bit higher than that who are women, like 36%. Percentage of first-time directors, 45%. So you can see some movement. There are two challenges to the point that you asked Boots, in my opinion. One is it takes a long time for people to retire from boards. Countries have put in, like Singapore has put in, if you've been on a board for 9 years, we don't consider you independent anymore, but you can write these reports and say, well, yes, John Smith is really pretty independent and he can stay on. So that's one issue. Another issue in Singapore and Australia is that we have many of the same senior women on multiple boards.
Yes.
And so we can say, oh, look, all these boards have got women, but Australia says you're overboarded if you have more than five public boards. But there is probably still a core group of women who have 5 boards each, which means that although the numbers are up, maybe the numbers of women on boards aren't going up as quickly. So I think those are two challenges we have to face. But so Australia was threat of quota, and Singapore has the same as Philippines, which is like write a report and sort of comply or explain. So it's changed, it's given people impetus to put women on boards.
But the Australian Stock Exchange has been very proactive.
It has, but
Yeah,
it's still
and
it's not a
quota.
It's not a quota, and it's plateauing. Like, we've had 7 years at about 35%.
Well, there are countries who may never get to 35%, so it's a nice problem to have.
Yes, but
I
we should be
understand
at
about
like 50 or 52, whatever our percentage of women is.
Yes. Okay. Rana, you not only saw, you are part of the report that we released. One of the things I did say about the low percentage of women on boards in MENA, the whole region, not just UAE, she's Lebanon and UAE, is the fact that it's so recent that the activities regarding women on board, for the most part in the region, in the few countries that are doing anything, it's still recent. It's early, and so there's room to grow. Because a few years ago in France, if you just looked at the numbers before they had the quota, it was unbelievably low. So tell us about the journey at UAE in terms of women on corporate governance.
I think the UAE is one of the, if not the leading, one of the certainly leading countries in adopting quotas. And I think what we saw in the Middle East is that most of the governments who have adopted this started with government entities. And I think that was an excellent step because they were able to walk the talk before they came to the private sector and said, you have quotas on listed companies. Then, of course, there were those like the UAE who insisted on one seat and so on and began these measures. Where we are at in the MENA region is that we haven't seen the teeth of these quotas yet. Yes. So we don't know if you do not meet the quota, what are they going to do with you? Mm-hmm. We haven't seen naming and shaming. We haven't seen carrots, and we haven't seen the sticks. And I think until we get to that stage, until it's publicly those regulators who announce these quotas or those government entities, and I wish they would implement it on the suppliers, begin to show us that there is a loss or there is a repercussion and a negative consequence. If you don't meet these quotas, we would still be at the stage where I call it encouragement, scared of the possibility of quotas, as you so well put it, but not necessarily driving that very quick action. Also, we are where Norway was. Norway was the leading in announcing quotas. Everybody says there aren't enough women. And if you recall, in Norway, they had the phenomenon of the golden skirt, where the same woman was sitting on 10 boards. We do have that in the UAE. We have many, many national women, very talented, but they're sitting on multiple boards. That's okay in the progression where we're having. But again, that excuse of not having the bigger pool. And don't forget, with the leading the leading countries in the Middle East where there is possibility for more investment, say, than Lebanon or Jordan or also the Gulf countries, there is still a scarcity of women that could qualify. But it's absolutely showing a lot of progress in Saudi Arabia, of course, North Africa, some countries, UAE is leading, so I'm very optimistic, but I think we need to put the foot on the paddle, and that starts with the government and the regulators and then the associations and.
Actually, the quotas that have worked in France, Italy, as two examples, it's because of sanctions if there is no compliance. In fact, I don't know whether it's France or Italy, if a company didn't comply, the entire board will be erased, right? And they have to go through another election. In Italy and in India, the regulatory body imposed fines. If you don't meet the quota, then the company is fined. Now, India had a bit of a problem because the fines weren't big enough. And so some companies preferred to pay the fines than to be forced to have a woman on the board. So it just an anecdote to show you the kind of resistance to having women on boards. It's not like there is a, what do you call this, a secret strategy to ban us. Part of it is there are no term limits, as Alisa mentioned before. In my country, the US, there are no term limits and no age limits. So you have some very old men who are still sitting on boards for whatever reason, however they got there. They may have been a CEO at some point, but they're no longer effective CEOs and they're probably out of the loop, you know? So I mention this because it is so important for us to keep pressing, you know? Like I always say, change doesn't happen without pressure, whether it is the pressure of women on boards, women's organizations, the pressure of the stock exchange as it was in Australia, or the pressure of a law, of a mandate. In Australia, I gave an award to the Australian Stock Exchange. They didn't just say, you know, it's great to have board diversity in the corporate governance code, which is housed in the stock exchange. They announced it, they made it public, and I asked this guy, the CEO of a company that was listed, I said, what was the difference? He said it was transparency. Then all of a sudden, everybody saw the numbers. And that in and of itself creates competition. You don't want your company to look lesser than a competitive company when it comes to women. And that's what happened in Norway.
Can I react to that?
Sure.
Well, the approach is to penalize. But on the other hand, that could also be a way to encourage or motivate companies. For example, with credit to the Philippine Securities and Exchange Commission, starting last year, they started to recognize publicly listed companies with a high number of women in boards. So at least that was, you know, a motivation for publicly listed companies to be in that list. And they're running it again this year and even expanding it to include not only companies with a lot of women in boards, but as well young CEOs and female sustainability champions. So there's this motivation now, I would assume to be in that list. Secondly, there is an ASEAN Corporate Governance Scorecard, which covers 6 ASEAN member states. And this is a rating and a ranking system which measures the disclosure practices and policies of companies, okay? Admittedly, I have to say this, that gender is just considered a bonus point for now. Nonetheless, I think and we have made a recommendation to make it a mandatory consideration in the ranking and the rating. But I think what's important to mention is that when you have these awards and you recognize for it, I think it's also a strong motivation for companies to be in the list. And I would like to cite ASEN, where I said we are 5 out of 11 board members. I'd like to believe that our presence there as female board members was contributory. And I have to say that we did push the company to be more proactive, even if it's already one of the large and exemplary conglomerates in the Philippines, to be really more deliberate into its governance policies. And as a result of that, the 5 women in the board started in 2019. We just had 2 golden arrows, which is a recognition that if you scored at least 80, you get 2 golden arrows. And just this year, that increased to 3. So I was telling the team that, I will not agree to just being 4, but we should jump into 5 immediately next year or the next standards rate. So there is this motivation as well, because there are rewards being given. Aside from, not penalties for now in the Philippines, but at least motivation to be in that league, so to speak.
Sure.
In the case of Peru, there are no quotas, there are no recommendations, and in the listed companies, more or less on average, 10% had a woman, and there is only, I have a bit old data, but there may be more than 50% of companies with no women. So the thing in here is that if you are listed, and in our case we are listed not only in Lima, also in New York, at the end you have the pressure of many stockholders, because you have the investors, you have your employees, it can be your customers. So there is a trend where even though you don't have the quotas, there will be a huge pressure coming from many other places.
No, it's a good point to raise, because investment groups like Blackstone, for instance, which is the largest investment fund, if you will, they are now telling their board, they're telling the CEOs of the companies that are in their portfolio that they want to know how they're going to arrive at a diverse board, what is the percentage, and when do they plan to arrive at it. And that pressure is actually even better than the law, because now you're talking shareholders. They're calling it shareholder activism. And in the US, we have, in addition to that, what they call social investment funds, which will be companies, a group of companies that will only invest in companies that have more women or better in environmental issues, or better. They're called social investment funds. Is that something that you think would work in Australia?
Yeah, I think it is already. Obviously, a number of the large firms invest in Australia, and a lot of those firms have private equity arms or are private equity firms like KKR, TPG, and I think that in the past they haven't worried about this too much, but as the funds get larger and as they look at the future, I think all of them have been putting more pressure on ESG. I would say a lot of that pressure to start with is the E part right now, as opposed to the governance and diversity, which usually comes under S for social. But I think there is an emerging trend of large investor groups pushing to make sure that the companies are more diverse.
There was a shock when Blackstone announced that this was a way they were going to measure the companies within their portfolio. Do you think that is a direction that could perhaps be taken in the region?
Absolutely, but I would call it slightly different weapon. The vision strategies of the GCC countries, UAE, Saudi Arabia, are making them, the governments or semi-owned government entities, the biggest buyers of services and almost sometimes products in the markets. So if they, and some are beginning to expect that, do not in the bids measure companies with the sustainability included, with diversity and inclusion included, and we're seeing signs of this. In our bids, they're asking us about our internal sustainability strategy. They ask about the number of nationals. Nationalization is a big DEI matter, almost as important here in the 6 GCC countries as gender is. So they're beginning to look at this. I tell you, that will have a very big multiplier effect, because the behavior of the multinationals and the regional and local companies here will change, because the most lucrative contracts are with the government. So absolutely, that is a very good weapon. Blackwater may do it for their investors, but we are already seeing signs that the governments, at least in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, are doing this, definitely in the nationals arena, but also in the gender. And that will absolutely change things. I just have one additional comment. So my colleague here on the panel talked about so many people, women on the board not reaching 5, 10. Why is 30% so important? And many of you may already know this. 30% and above is very important, because when you reach that on anybody, the minority, assuming it's women, stop behaving as a minority.
Right.
And they stop being treated as a minority. They really now integrate in that board. So while I don't recommend women who are more than 30% to stop embracing the gender agenda, they should, because we're not there yet. However, collectively the behavior will change, and you will not be treated as a minority and looked at, and there are repercussions for that. So while progression will take us to quotas and goals that are less, please consider them to be temporary, because unless you reach that 30%, we will not get there.
Plus, then you have somebody to talk to in the bathroom.
Pardon?
I said, then you have somebody to talk to in the bathroom.
Why?
Because at 30%, I don't know about you, but when you're on the board where you're the only woman, you go to the they all go to the bathroom and talk, and you go to the bathroom and I think that some decisions and some stuff gets decided in those breaks.
You've mentioned bathrooms. I always pride myself on getting very clean bathrooms, because there are so few women when I'm on boards and stuff, so I only have the set of bathrooms myself.
Sorry, can I add one thing about that?
Sure.
It's good to hear the 30% is a tipping point, but I think Boots mentioned something before about the 5. So one board that I'm on in Australia, there are 4 women now and 2 men. And one of the women, at least for Australia, is considered a woman of color, because she's partly Asian, which is, fantastic. And so every country, who's a minority or who's different is different. Like in Singapore, I count as a PR, but if you have somebody international, then they're not Singaporean, so that's difference. But I do agree with you that once you have more women on the board, you get more women. So we had to get 2 new board members in the past 18 months. And we used search, because I think that's the right thing to do, and we said we would prefer women. But in the end, the 2 board members we found, which the search evaluated, were 2 CEW, who Irene mentioned, is this list of all these high executive women in Australia. And so what happens when you say you want a woman is the search committees or the headhunters go through all these lists. But we all know all these women, and we can also look them up. So the women that we put on the board are 2 women that we knew between us, who still went through the search process. They did all the testing and interviewing that any other board member would do. But we happened to come up with 2 women who the search firm hadn't thought of through our networks. So, and that's how the old boys network works, et cetera. But the important thing here was that because there were already some women on the board, when we had to think hard about who might be interesting, who might add value, who have we not thought of, who might give us a different perspective, we didn't only put female names forward, but because we had a few more women on the board and we are lucky enough to go to events like this, we came up with some interesting names that the men on the board hadn't heard of.
Well, I think I mentioned yesterday the study that we had about when there were women CEOs. That was a report we did it twice. The likelihood of more women on boards and senior management happens. So you're right. And the 30% study that Rana is mentioning was actually a US study. They said 1 board member by herself is a token and viewed as such. 2, a little bit better. But 3, they're just board members. And gender no longer is as glaring. But I have to tell you, I was on the board of a company and there were 3 of us. 3 women out of 21. It was a big board, so it's not a huge percentage. but we would caucus in the bathroom and put ourselves in different committees to make sure we were an officer in 3 different committees. And one of the male board members said that when each one of us asked a question, they were scared. Because we ask questions that they don't dare to raise because they don't want to look stupid, but also want to hear what the answer is, but they don't ask it, you know? But the women would go, what does this bottom line look like? And why is this, you know? We had no shame. Anyway.
I would like
Maite.
to add something on that line. In one of the boards, I asked, there was a committee that was the Nomination and Remuneration Committee that there were no women. And then I said, I want to be on that committee because it cannot be that there is no woman. So I think it's extremely powerful either in the Sustainability Committee, if you are in charge of the S and the S is in charge of diversity, or in the Nomination Committee to have women. Because we do know where to find these women that are not so visible. And sometimes through the headhunters it's not so easy, and just through the male channels it's not easy as well. So what you were mentioning, Alicia, no, I have lived it as well, because in the case of Peru, I've been doing some research for positions in Spain and in other Latin American countries. So that's feasible, and I think it's a very good channel.
Did you want to say something, Boots?
No, speaking of where to find them, as you're aware, we organized this group of women corporate directors precisely to put us all together. Because as you mentioned, it's the usual suspects that you hear about. You know, it's the same women who become directors. But in fact, there are many other qualified women who are already directors or who could become directors. So we formed this group of women who are currently board directors of publicly listed companies as well as major public companies not listed. And our intention is currently the number of women in Philippine boards of publicly listed companies is 19%. Not look at Irene's face. And to be honest, in the last 3 years where we did a study recently, it has grown from only 17 point something to 19.8. So it's really a modest 2% increase. However, we hope that by forming this organization, which will drive the appointments of women in boards, we just have a modest target for now in 2025 of 23%. So at least slightly higher than where we are now at 20. So we hope that there will be more women in boards. And just to respond to this, why 30%? Perhaps there's also a rationale for it from the legal standpoint in a corporation. 33% is what they call a significant minority. And therefore, you have a voice, at least, which cannot be ignored. If you're just 1 in 21, did you say?
3. We were 3 out of 21.
Of course, the 3 can be as noisy as they can be.
We were noisy.
Of course. But however, it's not as powerful, perhaps, as having at least 30%, which is probably where
it should have been 7 out of 21.
But importantly, I think, as I mentioned also earlier, in that board of the energy company, all the women were chairing committees. I was chairing audit. Another one was chairing corporate governance. And we did have what we call tete in the comfort rooms or privately, before a meeting. We talk about our positions on certain issues. And somehow arrive at consensus. But even in meetings, we do disagree amongst ourselves. However, we try to consciously project our positions as board members, regardless of our gender, but really demonstrate to the board that we have something to contribute.
Can I go to the E&S part? ESG is now in the mantra of companies, right? They just go, ESG, ESG. And speaking for the US, companies responded to the environmental challenges far easier, far earlier than they would to the S part, which always frustrated me. Why is it you worry about the whale, somewhere, but you don't worry about the human being? not only on your board, but among your workers, among your leadership. And this woman answered, because you can see it.
Yeah.
And you can't always see progress in terms of, I said, but you can. There are more, right? There are more of them. More women on the board, more women in senior management, you know, more, just more. Anyway, where do your specific companies stand in terms of the ESG goals that have now cropped up as another metric used by investment funds as well as regulatory bodies, and now with the European Union developing its own metric for the region that will hold companies who are in stock exchanges in those countries also accountable? So what do you think about that development? Another way of measuring ESG.
Deloitte looked at both, but I know we are in a different space than possibly many other companies in our sector, all the sector, because we combine many things on these hot topics. We're thought leaders. We publish research. We have people who are specialized. We advise companies. So we get to see a little bit more of what needs to be done and where the focus is. So in our case, we launched 2 programs because you asked me about our specific companies. One is called World Class, and we do to put a measure to impact 100 million futures by 2030. We call the future, could be youth, could be, because we believe we should play where we are good at. We have the intellectual capital, but we don't produce products, so I cannot go and give medical supplies and what have you. In our space, we can train and develop programs. We said 100 million, and we divided it over the map of the world and said, your country has so many, and 1,000 and thousands, and we created joint or separate programs to do that. So that's on the S, and it's a wide array of types of initiatives: skills building, employability of women, STEM, and so on. On the sustainability side, we created a program called World Climate, and we put very specific goals to be
Say
net.
it again.
World Climate, which we put the philosophy around World Climate is we empower our people as agents of change, but we do put metrics for us. What you can't measure, you can't do. So we said net zero by 2030 and meaningful programs where we are unable to eliminate the carbon footprint and so on. And we're trying to measure these things. And this was done maybe about 2-3 years ago, so we are on our journey. If I assess, are we green, amber, on red? We are green on some, we are amber on some, and we started with the awareness of people within our firm. We're 450,000 people globally. And that size helped us, and we tried to partner. We were, for example, under the UN Global Compact, we were one of the first signatories. By the way, and maybe Your Excellency would like to know, the Global Compact chapter in the UAE, we are one of the first to found it currently. In Saudi Arabia as well, in Lebanon, and we're bringing all this together under this agenda. But I do recognize there are smaller companies around in our region, and we're still looking for ways so we can partner with them and help them on their journey. So these are a couple of examples of what we're trying to do internally.
Australia has been great in terms of the ESG part, and it's a very environmentally conscious country. Do you think enough is being done?
There's definitely not enough being done, because we heard today we've got about 3 years to turn things around. It's interesting because I tend to sit on smaller company boards, as you mentioned. And so when you're a company with, $500,000 or $1 billion revenue, or $1 billion stock market cap, there's limits to what you can do, and it's also hard to figure out what you should do. So if I use an example of Tyro Payments in Australia, which is a payment fintech, we were grappling with, there's, like Deloitte, there's nothing specific that we do. We're not oil and gas, we use data centers, and we are moving everything to the cloud, and we can do a deal with Amazon to try to do some offsets. But There's nothing specific that we're working on like the Baker and Hughes presentation this morning where we need to sequester carbon or change to hydrogen power. So what we've tried to do is find things that are somewhat related to the business. So we do buy carbon offsets, and we've tried to figure out a lot of our merchants are cafes. So we've bought some carbon offsets around planting and coffee. You know, it's obviously still a bit distant, but somehow related to our business. And then we've had some creative ideas. I wrote it down. I think I forgot it, but we are the 5th largest payments provider in Australia, so it's not that big on global standards. And I believe that we supply 20 million meters of paper receipts every year. You know, the stuff you get when you buy something, which is disappearing, and happy to see most of the stuff I've paid for here in Dubai, I have only gotten an e-receipt. But if you think about around the world, all the times that we're still getting paper receipts, and that's something that we are involved with. So we're trying to encourage merchants to move to e-receipts. So we're paying attention, but it's not always incredibly clear what to do. And I think you find a lot of mid-sized companies struggling with that, and people like Deloitte can give you great advice, but it costs money. So, you know, there's this, and just before you speak, because Baker Hughes was talking about it, there's, you know, all these consultants you can go to, like we use one called Pangolin for certification, because they were talking this morning about the greenwashing,
and
right?
pro bono engagement. So I don't want you to call me, but we do these things.
All right.
But
Yeah, you want to come
do you
to
know
Australia?
what you've just done? You've
What?
just described how your strategy is integrated with your services and the business. And the problem with many companies is they say, okay, let us look at our sustainability strategy, and they separate it. So
Yeah.
what you have just done
Good.
is fantastic, because you said, I'm giving my services, let me look internally and say how I can make them impactful to society. And we're trying to do that as well. And we found that we have such an impact we never considered, but let's organize it. Let's add it to the bidding. Let's add it to this and that and the other. And I think that's an excellent example. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
thank
thank you. That was terrific. I have to tell you, South Africa also had a similar system whereby if you wanted a government contract, a company had to show that they had black board members and women members, or black women members, in other words, you combined the two, and they gave you points for, you know, the metrics that you met. And the higher your metric total, the more likely you are to get a government contract. And I thought it was brilliant. I mean, you know, whatever works. And that's what I want to convey here, that there are different approaches to moving the needle on women on boards, but we have to try whatever works.
I wanted to share our practice in a listed property company where I'm also in the board as an independent director, where we have, in fact, you know, it's a family, still majority controlled by a family. However, they were quite, how would I say, very open to the views of the independent directors. There are 4 of us as well, 2 women. And because of our prodding, early on, maybe I'd say about 2 years ago, they took on the sustainability agenda more seriously. It's being overseen by a board committee. For now, it's still under corporate governance or risk oversight, where I also sit. But what's interesting about this company's, or the policy that we have adopted, is that we have tried to embed the ESGs into all as part of our value chain. So since we're in property, we do have impacts on the communities that we work in. So we need to be conscious of conserving resources, because we develop properties, virgin properties, and in the process we might, you know, touch upon environmental impacts. We look at also supporting local markets. We look at organizational efficiency as well as corporate governance. So there's now a consciousness in this company to really take into consideration ESG in everything that we do.
So-
although it's in this early stage, but what's good about it is that the consciousness is there. We even engage a sustainability officer precisely to focus on this, reporting to the board committee and ultimately reporting to the complete board.
But would you say that that's an exception rather than the rule in terms of the company? No, I mean, I don't
Well,
know.
I would say it's a growing trend, I would say. And at the end of the day, it's really a decision of the board. As you said, this has to be driven by the board. Importantly, if the board has to embrace it
Yes.
for it to work. Because the board will tell management, this is what we will do, and this is what you should implement. Perhaps one way to even encourage companies to even adopt it is the thought of tying in or including in the KPIs those which involve ESG and tying it to performance incentives or bonuses.
Very important.
That's one way to actually not penalize, but really encourage not only the CEO or the board, but everyone down the line to be conscious of the fact that you have a responsibility insofar as ESG is concerned.
I would like to give a difference between Europe and LATAM. In Europe, we are full of regulation.
Yes.
So the problem is that you are, in a way, obliged to apply ESG measures. And I think the origin of ESG should be based on the purpose of the company, to have a very clear or define the strategy you want to have in the ESG and to embed it on the business, on the business strategy. So the advantage of being on the boards in Peru, for example, is that you don't have this regulation, although you do have the pressure of the different stakeholders, but at the end what we are doing is something that they call tropicalize. So what they do...
What does that mean?
That means that rather than applying what is the rule, what you do it is to adapt it to your company and to your region. So, for example, in Peru, the first economic activity is mining. Mining is extremely contaminating. The second one is fishing, then is agriculture. So if you look at it, you couldn't be giving loans or investing in this type of industry. So the philosophy at the end is to be, okay, we are going to be like the bridge, the facilitator to help you to become more sustainable. Whereas in Europe, it's the opposite. In Europe, they are telling you, this is the regulation, you have to comply with all these rules. And at the end, you are not so sure if it's really on your purpose and you really believe that you have to do, that you want to do it, or if it's that you have to do it. So for me, there is a huge difference between wanting to do it and having to do it.
What if it's not in your mission? Right? So this is where regulations, you don't like regulations.
No, not much.
That's what I
They're
see.
useful
I think we are full of
sometimes.
regulation.
Sometimes it does help.
Sometimes it does help, but you need to know how to regulate as well. But even if you don't have it on your mission, you have many stakeholders. So if you want to attract investors, you want to attract talent, at the end you will have to decide, what has to be my mission, or what do I want to do? So even if you didn't think at the beginning about ESG, sooner or later you will have to consider it and decide if you want to bet or not.
We have 3 years left, so sooner is better than later. So for each company to think about, how it meshes with their goals, we ain't got time, is basically what it is. We could talk forever, so I want to hear from the rest of you.
Irene, can I just say something?
Yeah.
What my philosophy on what works in Europe certainly may not work in the Middle East. I have a 3-point, very simple rule. When I hear in a conference like this something which is brilliant, a brilliant idea or solution, I apply it. Adopt, adapt, create. If it's good enough and it works for me immediately, because we don't have time, I would adapt it. Adopt it as it is and go ahead. If it needs tweaking to match our environment, culture, what have you, I would a bit tweak it and then never go to create, because there's so much best practice we should discover around that will fast track these types of things, I think, for all of us. We need them.
Adopt,
Adopt as is, adapt it if you need to tweak it, then think of creation and putting all that, a new program from scratch.
Adopt, adapt, never mind.
Adopt, adapt, create.